Greetings! I am Herbert Erpaderp, and today I'm going to show you how I made these bases for the Cryx battle group I put together a little while ago. Plain bases are boring, and I wanted something a bit more interesting than just sand or grass glued to the base. The first thing I did was search my bits box for random odds and ends to turn into junk piles, and to select some flat material for foot locations. I'm using textured plastic sheet like this. Cut the flat pieces and place them on the bases using the models to get an idea of how they will stand on the base and to make sure there is something for them to be standing on. You could also place some of the bigger pieces of scrap to be sure that they will not interfere with the model. On one of the bases, I decided to make a floor out of cork. I applied that in much the same way as the plastic sheets. Cut it to shape, check against the model, and glue it down. Once you've worked out where the feet of the models will go, you can start adding the detail pieces from the bits box. Use your imagination with the part placement. Frequently check that the model fits as you go. It would be annoying to have to change later. Here's what I came up with. I used a bunch of evergreen styrene and a lot of random plastic soldier company bits. Of course they don't represent tank bits in the Warmachine universe, just bits of junk. You can see where I have marked foot placements too. This is to aid in the next step, which is to add rubble. For this I made a mixture of model railway ballast, tiling grout, static grass, PVA glue, and water. Don't make it too watery. I used a toothpick to spread it around. Also, sorry for the bad focus. I then take any extra detail pieces and press them into the rubble mixture. They may need extra glue once dry if you just place them on top of the mixture rather than pressing them into it. Finally, I sprinkle a little bit of dry railway ballast over the top, but not too much. Once this is all dried, it's time to start painting. First, prime the bases. My primer of choice is Vallejo Black Surface Primer, though you can of course use any kind of primer your heart desires. The next thing I did was to add some white to various pieces of rock. The idea here is to kind of pre-highlight for the next coat of paint, which is going to be model colour basalt grey. When doing this, be careful not to apply the paint too heavily, otherwise you'll render the pre-highlighting pointless. I was not entirely satisfied with the variation in rock colour I achieved, so I added a couple of spots of German grey, flat earth, mahogany, stone grey, and bronze green. I then went over everything with a wash of strong tone, thinned 3 parts strong tone to 1 part water. Once this was dry, I applied a light dry brushing of London grey. Now to start painting the details. I began with the floors. I applied a coat of chocolate brown to the stone textured plasticard, masked around the edges with Maskol, and used a piece of foam from some packaging to apply some whole red leather, and beige brown. I then applied a slightly watered down wash of dark tone. I went quite heavily with it and tried to get it to fill in the gaps between the stones. I added some splotches of German grey to this floor made from cork to add a bit of variety, and then I gave it a wash of Secret Weapon stone wash. After that dried, I added a wash of 3 parts strong tone and 1 part water. After that, I gave it a light dry brushing with stone grey. I then painted all the pieces of junk in a variety of colours that I figured would look interesting. I've used a lot of tank parts here, but there's nothing to say they can't be bright, non-tank-like colours. Use your imagination with this sort of thing. You can use whatever colour you like. After I got all the base colours down, I applied washes to them. For example, army paint a red tone on any red areas, and concrete wash on the bricks and pipes. I then applied some dry brushing to all the coloured parts. Obviously, an appropriate colour should be used. Lighter red on the red parts, for example. You might also add some edge highlights with a fine brush on some parts. Once this was done, I dry brushed black grey over the entirety of the bases. The idea here is to blend everything in and help dull the colours. I then added a bit more wash to any parts that I thought might need it. In this case, it was just the red parts. Once I was satisfied with all the colours, I used German grey to touch up any rocks that had accidentally got bright colours on them. I decided to try adding a bit of rust using MIG Pigment's standard rust. I almost never use pigments, and I'm not entirely sure of the best methods for using them. In this case, I decided to apply it wet. I mixed it with a small amount of pigment fixer and used a toothpick to apply it to various surfaces. I think these are done for now. They can of course still be altered before the models are attached. For now, I'm not going to apply any clear coats to them. I will save that until the time I paint the model, so the final touch now is to paint the rim of the base black. In this case, I just used primer. You can always paint them any colour you like though. I used a large brush to apply the bulk of the paint, and then painted up to the edges with a smaller brush to avoid getting black onto the parts where I don't want it. I'm pretty pleased with how these have turned out. When I make more for the rest of my Cryx army, I might try to add some more Warmachine looking pieces of scrap, and add more weathering, and probably more variety in colours, perhaps more dull colours. But I am quite happy with them. They should make the models I attach to them look much more interesting than if I was to just go with a simple basing of sand or grass. This project wasn't difficult at all, and it wasn't particularly time consuming. It's a good way to have interesting bases on the cheap. It's also a good use of Bitsbox parts, or an excuse for hoarding them. You can of course buy pre-made bases and base inserts and things like that, and those are cool, but it's kind of nice to have your own unique bases that nobody else has. I haven't included a list of paints because really, it doesn't matter. If you want to make some bases like this, you can use your own imagination and creativity to choose colours. I think that's probably the best thing about it. Hopefully this is helpful and inspires you to make your own bases for your minis. If you've got any particularly cool ones to share, I'd love to see them in the comments. Thanks for watching. Farewell.